This is the Canon 6D and I chose it as the camera for my creative studio just because one of the main reasons is that it's a full frame camera. Another reason was because it's a fairly old camera, so you can get it for quite cheap. And the third reason is that it's incredibly easy to use. And for you guys that don't know, I have created like an ultimate guide for beginner photographers on my blog. So if you're a beginner photographer and you want some tips on how to get started, and you want some camera recommendations, then feel free to look at that blog. But in this video, because I see a lot of questions of people asking, oh, what beginner camera should I buy? And the question isn't actually that straightforward. And in this video, I'm going to try and give you some information on how you can decide on what camera you should buy. And I'm also going to try and give you some camera recommendations of my own. And I think when choosing a new camera, I think what it really comes down to is what you want to shoot and what your budget is. And that is going to kind of guide you into what kind of camera you should buy. To a certain extent, it's actually okay if not quite decided, because there are a lot of cameras out there actually that are kind of a jack of all trades and they will do you well in kind of like most scenarios. But if you know exactly what you want to shoot, then that is definitely gonna impact the camera that you want to buy, and also know your budget, because you need to know how much money you want to spend on a new piece of equipment. I think it's important to kind of go over what different types of cameras are out there and what cameras are available to you. And there are four kind of main cameras that you're going to come across. There are compact cameras, bridge cameras, mirrorless cameras, and DSLRs. In this video, I'm only going to recommend mirrorless and DSLR cameras for reasons that I'll get into later, but I think it doesn't hurt just to go over different types and just give you a brief overview of their pros and cons and what they are. So compact cameras are typically your point and shoot cameras, and these are cameras that will generally have more usability than kind of your phone camera will, and they're easily portable, so they're good for if you want to go traveling and they can easily fit in your pocket. But the downside to compact cameras is that they have really, really small sensors, which means you're not going to kind of get that depth of field or really good use in like low light. Bridge cameras are just a kind of a bigger version of compact cameras actually. They kind of look a bit like DSLRs. But the thing about bridge cameras is, like with compact cameras, they also have like a fixed lens, so you can't take the lens off and change them. But also the good thing about bridge cameras is that a lot of them have like really, really good zooms. So you can get like 24 times zoom, 48 times zoom, and it's a really good like all-rounder. Again, if you're going traveling, they're not as portable as a compact camera, but they're still good use if you want to go traveling. The next is mirrorless cameras, and these cameras have kind of become popular in like the last decade or so, with most big camera manufacturers producing new mirrorless lines. And the reason why they're called mirrorless cameras is because typically DSLRs have a mirror inside the camera that kind of gives you real-time feedback on what you're seeing, whereas mirrorless cameras don't have that mirror, and instead they use electronic viewfinders. Mirrorless cameras will typically give you the same capability as like a DSLR. The quality you're getting from a mirrorless camera will be the same, it will be just as good. But the downside to mirrorless cameras is that they don't have very good battery life, but they are smaller than DSLRs and heavily portable. And then the last and probably most popular are DSLRs, and this is kind of what your most pro photographers are using, although there's kind of a shift into mirrorless cameras now. But these are kind of the bulky cameras. They're going to give you like the best quality, the best kind of function out of a camera, and they've just been around for years, so they're just reliable and they're really, really rugged. The bodies themselves are kind of like really, they're rubberized. They are made to last basically. So you can buy cameras now that have DSLR cameras that have been made like 10, 15 years ago that can still be used today just because they just last so long. And that is kind of like the basic overview. I don't think you need to know any more than that if you're a beginner. And as I said, I'm only going to recommend mirrorless and DSLR cameras anyway. I think if you are starting your journey into photography, I don't think a compact camera or a bridge camera is the best way to go. One thing that I struggle with is that don't be loyal to a brand. Just because you've used one camera brand in the past, it doesn't mean you have to continue using that brand. There are a bunch of different cameras out there that will give you different features, different usability, and I think it's important to kind of keep an open mind. Just because you've enjoyed using Canons in the past, it doesn't mean you can't suddenly change to a Sony and still have a really, really good time using a Sony camera. When looking for a new camera, just take the camera for what it is. Don't have preconceived notions of what the camera is just because a certain brand is attached to that camera. Having said that, the brands that I'm going to kind of recommend today are Nikon, Canon, Panasonic, and Sony. Just because I've used these cameras, this isn't to say that Fujifilm and Olympus cameras aren't good, because they are. I just don't have as much experience using them, so I don't think it's right for me to recommend those cameras. But in terms of those brands, kind of your Nikon and your Canons, they're kind of like the OGs in the DSLR world, and your Sonys and Panasonics are kind of the brands you want to go to if you're looking to buy a mirrorless camera. Although Nikon and Canon have recently made strides in the mirrorless market. So when you're buying a new camera, I think there's a few things you need to take into account depending on what you want to shoot. The first is if you want to get a crop or full frame camera. And what this means is typically the size of the sensor. And the bigger the sensor, the more light that your camera can capture. And you're going to see a lot of people online that say, oh, full frame is definitely the way to go. But this isn't necessarily the case. I have used Mark IV First cameras, I've used APS-C size cameras, and they're fine. And definitely as a beginner, I don't think the size of the sensor should play a huge role in terms of the camera you want to buy. And in fact, APS-C cameras and Micro Four Thirds cameras are typically less expensive than full frame cameras are. So actually, if you're a beginner, then a crop frame sensor camera actually might be the way to go. But if you know that you want to shoot in low light, if you know that you want to shoot portraiture, then obviously your full frame cameras are going to be the better option, just because again they perform better in low light typically, and they give you that nice shallow depth of field. So if you know that you do want to get into those kinds of photography, then maybe a full frame camera is the right camera for you. And I will be recommending some full frame cameras, but the cheapest full frame cameras typically aren't as good as Micro Four Thirds or APS-C cameras at the same price. The next thing you need to take into account is frames per second. And basically what this means is how fast your camera can shoot. So how many pictures can your camera take within a second? And this is gonna come into play if you are shooting fast action. So maybe you wanna be a sports photographer. I remember with my G9 that could do like 20 frames a second, which is incredibly fast. But now with the S5, it can only do about 5 to 7 frames per second, depending on what kind of shot you're using. If you are wanting to shoot action, shoot fast motion, you want to get a lot of shots in a short space of time, then this will definitely be something that you need to consider. Next is the low light capabilities. And again, as I said, with the full frame versus crop size sensor, typically your full frame sensors will have better low light than your crop frame sensors, although there are a few other things that you need to take into account as well. Some cameras have dual native ISO, which means they perform better at higher ISOs. And in a basic sense, when you raise your ISO, you start to introduce noise and grain into your image. And when you have cameras with dual native ISO, it means that when you use the camera at certain ISOs, it does a better job at handling that noise and handling that grain. So this may be something you want to look into if you are wanting to shoot in low light. The next is actually a big one. The next is portability. And I briefly spoke about this when I was talking about compact cameras, but in terms of mirrorless versus DSLR, your mirrorless cameras are always probably going to be a lot more portable than your DSLRs are. And if you do a lot of like street photography or you do like a lot of travel photography, then in terms of portability, your mirrorless cameras are going to be better. But if you're someone that is solely based in like a studio, or you actually don't mind lugging around a heavier camera, then mirrorless or DSLR will be fine for you. There are a lot of actually DSLR cameras now that are lighter, are portable, not as portable as a mirrorless camera, but they're still like okay to carry around for a few hours a day. But again, if you're someone that doesn't really care, or you don't mind lugging around a heavy camera, then that's not something that you really have to consider that much. And the last point, which I think a lot of people don't take into account, especially beginners, is your lens options. Because I think you are more likely to be upgrading your body than you are your lenses. I always say to people that you want to invest in lenses more than your body. When you're buying a camera, always be aware of the lenses that are available to you. Because once you buy those lenses, you can buy another body but still use those lenses. I'm kind of in a predicament myself now where I've bought the Panasonic S5, but there aren't a lot of L-mount lenses available right now for it. So I'm kind of in a bit of a situation now where I have the camera, but I can't afford a lot of the lenses, and there just aren't that many lenses out there. But always look at the lens options before you invest into the body. But also the thing about lenses as well is that they hold their value really well. So if you do buy a camera and you do buy lenses, and then you figure out, oh, actually I want to change systems, the lenses that you've bought will hold their value really, really well, and then you can sell them off and then invest into a new system. And speaking of lenses, typically your lenses for, say, a Micro Four Thirds camera are going to be a lot cheaper than the full frame equivalents. That's just something to keep in mind depending on how much money you have to spend. And in terms of your budget and how much you want to spend, I always say do not break the bank, especially with your first camera. It is very easy to kind of see all the specifications and all the features that a camera has, but in reality, you actually don't need a lot of those features. And I think it can become a quick downward spiral in terms of you getting a lot of ideas in your head about what you want to do and the kind of features you want to use and the kind of specs your camera has to have. But then you get into the field and you start doing photography and you find that a lot of the specs that you wanted or you thought you needed, you actually don't need at all. A lot of the cameras I'm going to recommend, I'm going to try and keep as budget friendly as possible. Obviously, there will be some that are a little more expensive. And if you do have the money to kind of invest a bit more money, then I'll say go for it. But if you don't, then don't break the bank. And also a good tip is I would never recommend buying a new camera as a beginner. I would say always go used. Go on eBay, go into stores that have pre-owned sections and look at the cameras that they have there, because you can buy like really, really good older cameras that are better than some of the newer cameras that they're releasing today. And then with the money you save, you can actually buy better lenses. So I would always say do that. Again, make sure you take note of the condition of the camera, the shutter count of the camera, and just be vigilant in terms of where you're buying it from. I would say for peace of mind, probably go to a camera store such as Wex or Jessop's or Camera World. But if you are someone like use eBay, then just be sure it's legit before you go in and buy it. But I bought cameras from eBay before and I've never had an issue. I want this video to kind of be a starting point for you in your photography journey. I don't want to kind of delve too deep into my camera recommendations because I'm not the best person to be kind of giving, in-depth reviews of cameras. But also I think the onus is on yourself to kind of do the research for you, because I could be telling you a lot of things, but these are the things that I care about with these cameras, but you may not care about. So I think the whole point of this is to kind of give you a starting point or some cameras that you can look at, but then it's kind of on you to go ahead and kind of do your own research into those cameras. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a couple of slides where you can stop the video and take a look at my camera recommendations. I will give you I'll give like a brief overview of the cameras. Maybe I'll give some pros and cons of each camera, just so you can kind of like get an idea of what the camera is and who it's for. I'll do one for mirrorless cameras and then I'll do one for DSLRs. Again, I'm not someone who knows every single camera there is out there. These are just cameras that I know that are good for beginners and cameras that I would use myself or have used myself. But yeah, so let's start with the mirrorless cameras. These are the mirrorless cameras that I think are a good fit for beginners. There's kind of like a whole range on there in terms of price and in terms of brands. And I think any camera on here would be a really, really good option. And I think if you are wanting to go mirrorless, I would say really, really do look at the Micro Four Thirds system. Even though it is a smaller sensor than APS-C and a full frame, I think the lens options you get with Micro Four Thirds is really, really good, and the price is unbeatable. Honestly, when I had my G9, I was investing in lenses so soon, as opposed to my S5 now, where I'm literally gonna have to wait like a year or so before I can buy a new lens because it's so expensive. Yeah, if I could have kept my G9, I would have, but I just couldn't afford to. Definitely look into that system. But as I said, any of these cameras will be a good camera fit for you as a beginner. And here are my options for DSLRs. I actually have less experience with DSLRs. I think this Canon 6D is the first DSLR I've actually owned. I've used them in the past, but it's the first one I've actually owned myself. I think there is something kind of satisfying about using a DSLR as opposed to a mirrorless camera. Unless you use both, you can't really describe the feeling, but if you use a mirrorless camera and a DSLR, you kind of get what I'm talking about. But a DSLR just makes you feel important. It kind of makes you feel more like a professional photographer. Just when it clicks, it just feels good. But yeah, these are my recommendations. And the brand options for DSLRs are a lot less than your mirrorless. as I said, Nikon and Canon are kind of your only options with the DSLR. I mean, like, you got like Pentax and other brands out there, but in terms of this video and the brands I'm going to recommend, then it's just Canon and Nikon. That's really it. As I said, I have a whole blog online that basically goes through every single step you need to get started photography. So if you want to look at that, please head over. I'll put a link in the description below so you can check that out. And yeah, I just want this to be kind of a starting point for you in terms of looking into what cameras you can buy for your own photography. If you're looking to just do it for fun or you want to make a career out of it, then I want this video to be a good tool for you to start that journey. Yeah, if you've got any questions, then feel free to leave me a comment and I will try my best to get back to you. But yeah, if you want more photography videos, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.